In today's episode of Shield Hero Cut content, we're gonna cover episodes 7 and 8, where a lot of the missed scenes and interactions focused on building our main characters, both as individuals and as a team. So join me once again as I fill you in on what exactly the anime skipped from both the light novel and the manga. Let's begin. Episode 7, The Savior of the Heavenly Fowl, covering Volume 3, Chapter 12 in the manga, and Volume 2, Chapters 15 to 17 in the light novel. We start from where Naofumi is heading to a village to sell some herbicide for their recent vine infestation. Not wanting to be seen as a hero, he switches to the book shield where he can turn it over and place it in his hand to make him seem like he's carrying it, allowing him to blend in as a normal merchant rather than be recognized as the shield hero, something that he was actively trying to avoid. Well, the plan worked because he was instead recognized as the saint with the god bird, an identity that these villagers didn't know was shared by Naofumi. Now, these villagers were in need of dire help. Normally, they would have put in a request for a hero to be sent by the crown, but since that would take way too long, they decided to beg the saint for help instead. Naofumi's only condition for helping was to be paid up front. It was just a precautionary measure in the case that his identity as the shield hero was revealed, which could potentially result in the villagers treating him differently. So it was sort of like an insurance of payment. The group heads off, and before even reaching the main plant boss, they're first attacked by parasitic vines. They had to be careful with these because if they were touched by it, there was the chance that they'd be infected, just like how the villagers were. It's during these initial fights that Naofumi uses his newfound magic to cast Fast Guard on both Raphtalia and Philo, which, if you recall from last episode, it's a minor defense buff. They're then attacked by the monsters that we see in the anime. The bioplant, which was the main boss, and two subspecies birthed from it called the Mandoragora and the Plantry. The flower-looking Plantry was a humanoid creature made from vines that attacks with a cloud of poisonous pollen, while the Mandoragora was an immobile fortress-type enemy that spit acid from its vines in order to stun its target so that it could slowly drag it in and then eat it. It's while confronting these monsters that Naofumi comes across a weird exception to the shield's rules. Remember, he's not supposed to be able to use anything other than the shield and its innate powers when attacking, right? Well, did we not just see him use the weed killer to attack and eliminate the bioplant? I'm pretty sure that doesn't classify as attacking with his shield, so why didn't the shield prevent him from using it? Your guess is as good as mine, but Naofumi suggested that the shield didn't see the monster as an enemy to be attacked, but rather as just a plant that was forcibly being removed from the area. A process that was no different from mowing the lawn or pulling some weeds. But that made him wonder, how was the shield able to judge between what was an enemy and what wasn't? So he theorized again, maybe the weed killer just wasn't a weapon, and just like how holy water was used to kill undead, you can use this weed killer as a tool to get rid of giant poisonous plant monsters. If I had to guess though, I'd say that it's because the potion was a direct product of the shield, and because of that, the shield was okay with it being used. But whatever it was, Naofumi didn't really care that much. As long as it worked, he was happy. Now, in the light novel, there was a bit more danger to the fight because the entire time that Philo and Raphtalia were taking on the bioplant, Naofumi was holding the aggro from both other plant monsters, all while trying to provide support with his various shield effects. He used Airstrike Shield for makeshift platforms, and then Shield Prison for temporary protection from the vines. It's only after realizing that his defenses were high enough to literally nullify every attack that he decides to nonchalantly walk up to the roots and pour the weed killer on it. Having defeated the plants, as is his usual routine after every fight, he absorbs the remains of them to unlock some new shields, the bioplant, Plantrui, and Mandragora shield. This also gave him access to a brand new line of tree-related shields, with plenty more to be unlocked. Though out of the 3 that he just gained, the bioplant one stuck out the most, due to its plant reform equip bonus, this allowing him to imbue a seed with magic. He decides to test it out with one of the bioplant seeds, which results in a display showing its entire stat and ability line. Turns out, he's able to change each of these properties and their levels in exchange for some of his mana points. Curious as to how far he can go, he attempts to put all of the points into growth. Seeing that it worked, he smirks at the thought of the true miracle seed that he can make with this ability, along with all of its potential profits. That is until Raphtalia brings him back to reality. So they head back to the village, but Naofumi was still curious about the abilities of his newly unlocked plant shields. Looking at it closer revealed that the bioplant shield actually had chemistry with the Mandragora's plant analysis ability. So after sleeping with the Mandragora shield equipped to passively gain equip time in order to unlock the shield's ability, he decides to try out plant reform once again, to find that more seed information was now available to him. It gave descriptions and additional modifiers to the seed, Now being able to understand the settings that he was adjusting, he sets the seed's expansion rate to 4, its food production rate to a 15, its ability to grow in any type of soil to a 6, its resistance to diseases a 4, then unsure as to what intelligence meant, he thought it was best to keep it at a 1 so as to prevent a hostile takeover from autonomous plants. Then he upped its growth rate to a 15 and minimized its ability to turn into a monster by setting mutation to 1. As for the dried seed growth modifier, he changed that option from mutation range expansion to quality improvement, essentially turning it into the fruit making machine that we see in the anime. Now, the second arc of this episode comes from the extra chapter of the light novel, and it's a bit different because rather than showing events from Naofumi's point of view, as all the other chapters do, this chapter's told from Raphtalia's POV. It's meant to show in a comedic way Raphtalia's feelings towards Naofumi and his lack thereof towards Raphtalia. There was actually a pretty funny scene skipped where it's just Raphtalia and Naofumi in a room alone. Raphtalia only has a towel on. Now, before you get too excited, it's because Naofumi wanted to try some new medicine on her in order to treat the scars on her back. However, Raphtalia had different plans in mind. And yeah, it's pretty much exactly as you think. You see, ever since her initial bath in the hot spring, she became really caught up in thinking about the sign that she saw. And because of this, she really wanted to get Naofumi to take a bath with her. So what does she do? She drops her towel and proceeds to ask how her naked body looked. At this point, she wanted him to really see her and comment on her matured appearance. But Naofumi was just looking to see if the medicine worked on her scars. He didn't flinch or even respond at all in any way that Raphtalia wanted. All he said was that she's changed a lot. Of course, this was extremely embarrassing for Raphtalia. All she wanted was to be seen and treated like an adult, but as things were now, she knew he would continue to keep treating her like a child. The only thing left that she could think of was to just confess her feelings. And in typical anime fashion, as she was about to, Philo walks in, sees Raphtalia naked, and proceeds to follow suit. Which is now my cue to move on to the next part of the story. And no, nothing happened after that. This was more of a scene intended to highlight the contrasting views that Naofumi and Raphtalia have of each other. The rest of the hot spring arc is pretty much the same, and the end of the episode then leads back into the main story of the light novel, opening up the Dragon and Curse Shield mini-arc, leading us nicely into episode 8, Curse Shield, covering chapters 18 to 20 from the light novel's second volume, and chapters 12 to 13 from the manga. Right from the beginning of the episode, there's quite a few interactions that were skipped between the three of them. You see, as it was getting pretty late, both Philo and Raphtalia were getting ready to sleep. Raphtalia is setting herself up in the carriage, when she decides to call out to Naofumi and say that they should sleep together. Naofumi, a bit confused by this, assumes that it's cause she's lonely or having bad dreams again, so he tells her to just sleep next to Philo. Of course, that wasn't what she intended with her request, so she decides to ask another question. She asks if there was anyone he liked back in his own world. He responded no, but what did come to mind was the thought of bitch, and that started to piss him off a little bit. He's able to put that thought aside, and he starts to contemplate his time with Philo and Raphtalia. He thinks that maybe he's pushing them a bit too hard. After all, they are both still just kids. Raphtalia may look like a woman, but inside, she's still a kid trying really hard to act like an adult. And it's because of this mentality that it brings us back to this belief that he needs to treat them as if they were his own kids and raise them as such. It's a little bit after that that Philo has her own conversation with him, asking why out of all the eggs, she was the one that was picked. Naofumi said it was just random luck, but he's happy she was the outcome and couldn't imagine it any other way. These were just sugar-coated words to make Philo feel better. He didn't actually feel that way because deep down he saw himself as the villain. He wants to set Philo free and make the world a better place for Raphtalia, but he wasn't strong enough to accomplish any of that. So all he could imagine was having to keep these kids as his slaves forever, which was an outcome that he didn't want to accept. He couldn't have it be that way. It just wouldn't be fair to Philo and Raphtalia. Philo then goes on to talk about how she heard that she was cheap. Turns out that during her evaluation with the slave trader, he commented on how she was only worth about 50 silver coins. You see, Philo actually came from 2 flightless Philolials, and as such, would have been raised to be eaten. But the slave trader speculates that it's either because she was with the shield hero or ate the chimera meat that she grew up to become the queen she is today. You can imagine that something like this would have a lasting effect on Philo's view of herself. Hearing herself being called cheap made her have a fear of being abandoned. She's always thinking in the back of her head that if she's not a good monster, she'll be left behind. Of course, Naofumi reassures her that if she just behaves, then that won't happen. She then falls asleep on his shoulder while Naofumi continues to contemplate on how he's going to make a place in this world for both Raphtalia and Philo to live peacefully after the fighting is done. Alright, now let's get to when they arrive at the diseased village. He's immediately recognized as the saint with the god bird, and Naofumi quickly notices the severity of the village's plague. It looks so bad that he wasn't even sure that his medicines would work. That's why he insisted on applying the medicines himself. Doing so makes them more potent and effective. You see, he didn't want the people to start to lose faith in him should the medicines not work. He wished he could make stronger ones, but he just wasn't knowledgeable enough to do so. After applying a few potions to some patients, he noticed that some of the surrounding ones were also starting to appear healthier. It would seem that Naofumi has a medicine efficacy range expansion ability, which allows those in close proximity to him to also be healed even if the medicine isn't directly applied to them. Now aware of this, he gathers as many sick villagers as he can and has them form a circle around him, allowing him to use a single medicine to heal all the villagers. Of course, this only made them slightly healthier. It didn't fully eliminate the disease, and Naofumi wasn't pleased with these results. He wanted to cure them, not just give them a temporary solution and then leave. It's the little thoughts like these that really highlight the contrasting views between him and the other heroes. Naofumi's always looking at the bigger picture, looking for ways to make things better in the long run, whereas the other heroes seem to be rather short-sighted, not considering the consequences of their actions and merely just acting on what they think is best at the time. Likely still seeing this world as a game rather than something real with real ramifications, which is why we see Naofumi constantly cleaning up their messes. It's around this time that we're told about the dragon. Oh, and her? Yeah, she doesn't exist in the manga or the novels. Anyway, Naofumi accepts the job to remove the remains of the dragon and sets off for the mountains. The path was filled with many new types of monsters, giving them the opportunity to gain a fair bit of XP and unlock some new shields. He's able to unlock the following poison shields, each of which grant various levels of poison resistance. He also gains the Bee Needle Shield too, with the only difference between this and the first iteration being that instead of paralyzing an opponent, this one deals poison. They eventually reach the dragon, and as you know, it becomes an undead version of its former self. This had actually frightened Naofumi to the point that he was screaming in terror, and Raphtalia had to calm him down. The reason being that in the games he used to play, he knew that undead versions of living creatures were always stronger than their living counterparts. So all he could think was that there was no way they'd be able to defeat this monster as they were now. But before Naofumi could call for retreat, Philo's natural instinct as a Flolial kicked in, causing her to attack the dragon due to their innate animosity for each other. The way that the fight transpires after this is more similar to the light novel, because in the manga, Naofumi actually tries to call Philo back, but she ignores the order, and this triggers the curse seal to activate, momentarily stunning Philo and causing her to get eaten by the dragon. And remember, this was only a day after that he had promised to protect these two as their parent. This triggered a completely new emotion within him. It hurt, but it wasn't the same hurt he felt when he got betrayed. No, this was something far worse. This was true despair, a feeling of pure hopelessness and devastation where no action or revenge could make up for. Succumbed by this severe feeling of grief, the shield presents the curse series as an option. Then the same black mist that he saw when dueling Motoyasu begins to expand from the shield. His entire shield tree flips over to reveal a new one of only red and black. But there was only one that he could select, the Shield of Rage. This came with the Iron Maiden ability, and an attack version of Chain Shield. What we mainly see in the anime though, was the equip effect called the Self-Burning Curse. He also gains increased physical strength, but the curse is what's really worth noting here. The exact details of its effects aren't quite known, but based on the events of the fight, I'd assume it's a passive effect that allows him to emit a flame-like aura that deals both fire and curse damage to anyone that physically makes contact with him, or is within the general vicinity. He also attempts to cast the Iron Maiden ability to close out the fight, but there's actually a set of conditions that need to be met in order to activate it. It's like a sequence of actions that must be performed before casting, sort of like a combo move. Once we get to episode 11 though, we can talk about that more. At the moment, Naofumi didn't feel like trying to figure out what those conditions were. He decided to just let the dragon attack, then let his self-burning curse and physical strength do the rest. He was pretty much on autopilot, and so long as he remained angry, the curse series would remain active. It would even get stronger the angrier he got, so all he had to do was continually think about all those people who betrayed him. It's only after feeling the warmth of Raphtalia's hand that his hatred begins to fade, and as it does, the shield starts to talk back, saying how his anger was weakening, asking why it's being refused, and finally stating that it will always be watching for a weakness to exploit so it can come back. Which brings into question the level of sentience behind this legendary weapon. Is it fully controlled by Naofumi, or does it have a goal of its own? Something that will only be found out as we learn more about this world. Now, although Raphtalia brought his composure back, the fight still wasn't over yet. The dragon was still alive. What the anime didn't clarify though was that the return of his sense of self gave him more control over the self-burning curse. Rather than indiscriminately attacking everything, he was able to focus the curse on the poison and burn that instead. But that still didn't change the fact that Raphtalia had severe burns all over her body, and no amount of first heal magic or medicine could fix it. In the meantime, the curse was burning the dragon while Philo was eating its insides, which is what caused it to eventually be defeated. Philo and Naofumi then clean up the remains, though letting the shield absorb pieces of it didn't seem to unlock anything for him, which was kind of a letdown considering the difficulty of this monster. After returning to the village, Naofumi gives more thought towards Raphtalia's wounds. Perhaps the Shield of Rage puts an untreatable curse on its victims, a thought that triggered all sorts of guilt within him. If he just controlled his emotions and wasn't so weak, he wouldn't have had to use this shield. He should have trusted that they would have all been able to handle the fight. Had he been more composed, he could have supported Philo rather than distract her, and they could have won the fight together. But he was held back by his own thoughts that were too afraid of losing them. Ones that were too afraid to let him trust that they'll be okay on the front lines every single time. When he goes on to talk about courage and recklessness versus caution and cowardice, it's actually Raphtalia who says these lines. She's on the verge of tears, trying to reassure Naofumi that they'll be alright in those situations. He just needs to have a bit of faith. In my opinion, having her say this instead of Naofumi would have been better to highlight her growth as a character. Not only would it have been a sign of her increased maturity, but it would have also paved a path for Naofumi to begin seeing her like an adult. In the light novel, Naofumi even mentions how he couldn't treat her like a child anymore. He now saw all three of them as a team. So, all in all, the theme of this episode was all about personal growth. Each member had their own inner and outer conflicts, and most of them were either handled through discussion with each other or through personal action. There's a level of maturity that was reached here that the anime didn't seem to highlight very well. Rather than just being another adventure with some unfortunate outcomes, this was a learning experience for all of them. So yeah, that's episodes 7 and 8. I really hope you guys are enjoying this series, because it does take a significant amount of work from Salazar84 and I to put these together. So it's always great to see your support. The next episode will likely be in 2 weeks and cover episodes 9 and 10. Eventually we will get caught up to the anime. But until then, thank you all so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!